Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Business Barbershop Podcast. I am Chris.
I'm Keen.
Today, we're going to probably talk about a smorgasbord of things. DOGE is definitely on the agenda. I would like to talk about March Madness, maybe with just a hot second for fun. And that's it. So let's just dive right in. Let's just get right to it. So you were just about to start talking about some DOGE stuff. And I was like, let's just record. So
yeah,
finish your thought. Let's just go from there.
Yeah, I'm actually really confused. People come to our show and they expect us to have an opinion on our topics. And I definitely have opinions related to the topics, but I'm a little. I don't really understand the narrative of the Democrats who say they're anti-Elon and the DOGE stuff. Obviously, people are kind of chalking him up to having gone crazy, is what is the way I think it's being portrayed. But I've not really heard any arguing points as to why they don't like the government cuts. So I find it a little bit confusing because I don't really understand what the message is.
Yeah.
I
have some ideas.
Sure.
I think what you have, so a couple things. I think you may have some Republicans that feel the same way. They probably just are less vocal about it because the chance of backlash is probably just greater, either inside of the party or, maybe with some of their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I'm speculating, obviously 100%, I think some of the anxiety or some of the pushback is because some of the cuts are directly affecting the pocketbooks of some of these politicians. A lot of this money that went out to US aid and things like that, I think eventually made its way back into the election coffers of a lot of these politicians. And I
would have thought that would have been a problem. Yeah, like you said, on both sides.
I think it was more, my guess is though, it was probably more egregious in this way, like running through the government with the Democrats, only because of the programs and the things that they were funding. They weren't like, let's teach kids how to use guns or something, which you would think would be like a Republican.
Yes. So, I mean, that could be the case, but I guess where I'm really confused is that seems like a lot of the backlash is like, I've seen like people do like a whole, tell Elon, we don't want his cars anymore, protesting people on the street. And I'm like, are those laid off government workers?
It's yes. So the answer is,
because that would make sense to me, because if, I saw some people getting laid off, but
it's bigger than that. It is bigger than that. So there in this, I was talking about this. I think maybe we talked about it for like a hot second when Andrew was here, or at some point in time. Maybe it was just when we were at like date night or whatever. But I think these changes are for a certain person are very, very impactful. Like there are certain government programs that have just stopped. Obviously, there have been workers that have been laid off. And if you were using one of those programs that was helpful and was like legit, and all of a sudden now it just doesn't work anymore, that's a problem, I think, for them. And what you have is, I think you and we don't use a lot of government services, a lot of government programs. So
no, I have a lot of family on Medicaid.
But even Medicaid is still just medical care, basically. It's subsidized medical care. But this would be like, I don't know. Somebody posted about something in the Facebook group, but like Veterans Affairs, has been cut a little bit. So maybe now you can't get access to the therapy that you were getting, or I'm totally just making up examples. But I think there are a lot of those type of examples where a lot of people are specifically feeling these cuts, and it is affecting their lives. And whether or not they should be reacting that way, I think is probably a different discussion. But
I was just surprised how many people are picketing about it. Because I'm like, is there that many laid off government workers doing that, or are other people who are not in that crowd
yeah,
like doing
I
it?
think
And
it's
if they
both.
are,
Yep. I think there's
I
also
don't understand
then
what the message is from people who are not in that crowd.
I think there's also just this hype cycle as well about Elon really wanting to take over the government, and be like a czar. I think there's a little bit of that's involved. I think there's a certain type of person in both parties that is immediately against what the other party is doing, no matter what, with no thought, with no,
Mm.
mm, no education, no learning about anything that's happening. So I think those are kind of some of the things that are going on. Here's I think also too, like let's talk about the 10 people picketing outside of a building in, our country of, 300 million people. So I think social media or the news can also call attention to these things, which may or may not be representative of what most of the people are thinking.
I saw something on social media that was reflecting a group of people who were very anti-Tesla, anti-Elon in Washington State, and the crowd was pretty big. And there's not a lot of federal employees in
Yeah, but how
Washington
big?
State.
Yeah, but how big was the crowd? It's the same crowd that does like the Labor Day and parade and bashes
Yeah, maybe
windows.
like 50 or so, 50 to 100 people there, something like
Yeah,
that.
but 50 to 100 people out of Seattle, for example, is like what 2.5 million people.
Sure.
So
I'm
that's
just
point
wondering,
oh
like,
oh 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 1%.
who on a Monday morning was able to gather 50 people who normally have jobs?
They don't have jobs. These people are career protesters. This is what I'm saying.
I
They
see.
go to every protest.
Yeah. They look like people who should have jobs. That's why I was so confused about it.
Hmm.
Like, you look
You
like
would,
you'd have a job. So how'd you, like, just took a day off to do this? Like, and what? And I'm not. It's not questioning them. It was, for me. It's like what I saw was look like regular middle-aged Americans who look like they'd have a job, who are
yeah,
protesting, and I couldn't understand the message about what they think Elon's doing wrong. They've joked about uh, gluttonous government spending. I thought from both sides of the parties for decades. People who've, like, I've heard comedians laugh and joke about the fact that government spending $5,000 for a toilet since the 80s.
yeah,
So I don't, from someone who's been pretty bipartisan, who's voted both ways. I mean, I don't know. We don't typically talk too much about our own political points of view. I think most people know me. Know I've voted both sides. I listen to both sides. My politics always kind of pivot back and forth on certain topics,
yep,
and um, I'm honestly looking for like a real talking point. There has to be a real talking point. I'm probably not hearing also, and I couldn't figure out what their message is that they're trying to say. Sometimes I think the agendas become pretty clear, right?
yeah,
But
I agree.
like,
Yep,
there's not a lot of federal employees in Washington State other than military. And so if I heard that this was happening, let's say, like we talked a little bit about like how it's impacted a little bit like the real estate market in Bremerton because their primary employer is the Navy bases there, right?
yep,
And I own property there, right? I've watched the rent slide. I've watched property sit a little longer because of it. People are just kind of afraid before they want to pull the trigger on something. So it's actually already affected my pocketbook to some extent, right? Um, and which I understand. It's mostly like there's nothing that's official that's happened in the area, but it's it is part of the umbrella of the federal government and potential spending cuts. So it could end up affecting a deal that I'm working on. I've already purchased in October last year, but uh, if for instance that was happening in Bremerton, which is a very big military town, I would
yep,
think to myself like, okay, I kind of get it because they're literally the naval base represents in a city like Bremerton is equivalent to like what Boeing means to like Renton, right? Like they pump out a lot of planes there. Also, what Boeing means in Everett, right? And I would say that
yeah,
if anything, uh, what the naval bases mean in Bremerton relative to the local, you know, civilians there is more impactful than even what Boeing is to Renton or Everett. It's kind of like imagine what Boeing's presence is and the naval presence in Everett combined is maybe close to what the naval presence means in Bremerton, but still short of it. They really are the employer for that city, and none of it was happening there. It was all happening. I want to say it looked like Seattle, I think. Um, I mean, I understand. I'm not going to try to act stupid and not understand that there could be like this whole general anti-Trump approach to why they're there, but normally the Democratic position when it comes to these topics is they criticize the Republican Party for having these kind of like, yeah, get her done, make America great again, and not being educated on why they take the positions they do. Like these
Yep.
uneducated Trump supporters is kind of I've heard this narrative kind of being pushed towards why they're anti-Trump, right? I've definitely seen some memes and understand why they take that position, because some of the people who are wearing those mega hats, like they don't really probably do their party any justice. So I get that point of view. But if I guess I'm kind of in my mind thinking they're not doing the same thing, because that would look so counterintuitive to the message they've been trying to portray onto the Republican Party for a while, which is this uneducated, broad stroke. Yeah, like we're just going to trust this, right? And so the only angle I can see is this: we don't trust Trump, and so if we don't trust Trump, we hate Elon now, and blah, we hate Teslas. And that's not typically been the message that I've heard from that party. It's usually
Yeah.
no, like when you really dive into the details, this is why we care about these topics. Is
From the
generally the
Democrats,
message. Yeah, as they get to the
I
topics.
don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I don't think they dive into anything. I think they have their own snap reactions, just like Republicans do.
I'm
I
sure there's
think
people on both ends that do that. It's just I'm surprised to see it when I saw the group of people protesting and the location it was being done in. It didn't look like the kind of party of
right.
people that would say that. They look like educated, middle-aged,
Yeah.
employed Americans who were really anti-Tesla. And I get if you're mad at him because he pivoted from one party to the next, then and that's the message. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense to me. But when it's directly focused towards his changes he's doing towards DOGE, I haven't heard I have not heard an argument as to why.
I think yeah. I think some people, the Democratic Party generally is more problem or solution oriented with more government programs. So I think just the cutting of government programs in general, it may be a factor. Just believing that these programs exist to help people, and they're basically just thwarting those efforts. This is all just speculation, though. But that I think that's some of it. I think there's also just this, general anti-Trump feeling amongst Democrats, and that gets pushed on to anybody that he is associating with. And the two of them are pretty tightly linked together right now. So there may be some of that as well.
So maybe I'm overlooking the situation, and it's this association with Trump that's kind of just is being broad stroke. But the crowd I saw didn't appear that way. It looked like an educated, group that was,
Sure.
that taking a position. And I don't understand the point of the message. I guess, I probably have to call some of my friends who are, to hear their points of view that, the way I've always kind of looked at politics is I like to hear educated people who support both sides before I really make a position on a specific topic. And I do find that many times when I hear a point of view, there's angles that I hadn't and perceptions I hadn't seen before. I saw that there's also a little press about like he's starting to do some massive deportations. Looked like he took like a group of Venezuelans that were part of a gang and deported all of them.
Yep.
And there was a doctor there was a doctor / professor for Brown University who was seen attending funeral for like a Hezbollah leader, and she got deported. That also was confusing to me because at first I didn't reference that it was a man or woman, right? But I think I read later that that person that got deported was a woman, and
I saw that too, like as a headline, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not, I don't want to act like I'm not totally educated in foreign affairs, but I didn't actually know exactly where Hezbollah's position was, and I read it, and it felt very like Islamic State stuff, the way it was depicted on the internet. but I've not researched enough to see what the real positions on stuff, whether or not they're just being broad show called like a terrorist group or whatever. But it looked
I
like
think they generally don't do very good things.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're definitely it's really hard to tell in that message of like the whole like anti-Israel messaging that gets thrown out there, because it's like
Yeah.
how much of it are how much are Muslims who are anti-Israel, are they necessarily, some of them might get classified as like a terrorist just for that position. I don't know. I can't speak to it. I think I would have to
Yep.
talk to someone that's first-hand experience to really speak to it intelligently. But it sounds like she was a sympathizer for that group, went to the funeral, and they got deported. I'm assuming that none of these people have a green card.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
The
I
one,
need some
well,
people.
the one, yeah, the
I need
ones
some
I
people to
think
help fill in these gaps for us.
the gang members and things like that definitely don't have a status here. They don't have status. But if you're accused of a violent crime, you lose your status anyway. That's like how that goes. So
Yeah, and there's a judge who was trying to stop the deportation orders, but then it looks like the legal team representing Trump said that the timing of how they did it, they have the legal power to do what they're doing. I don't know. There's like a big argument about it, but I don't, I probably should go, read what these orders say, what the history. I mean, someone has to. It'd be really nice if some people did some real reporting. I mean, what happened to real reporting?
doesn't sell.
Maybe
That's what happened to it.
Maybe I'm a little sensitive to the topic because I'm watching the Daredevil series again with my son, and then like, there's this guy that was like a really big, in-depth reporter who really tried to get to the real bottom of the news, got killed for doing it, and then some gal that kind of fills her spot that was in the TV series. My son likes to show us where, hey, when you have a teenage child, you do what they want to do, right? I don't know if you've seen that meme about Tina Fey talking about what it's like to ask your teenage kids if they want to hang out. It's kind of like asking out your high school crush if they want to hang out. Like, hey, do you want to maybe come out? Oh yeah, you're right. You don't want to do that. That's stupid. I'm sorry I asked. Right? It's
That's funny.
And so like cases at an age where it's like if it's something he wants to do, then we're doing it, because it's like I mean, like once they realize that they have the ability to say no to things they don't totally care for, then they get pretty focused on, that doesn't sound cool. I don't want to do that. So he likes that show. He wants to rewatch it before we watch the new series that just came out.
Yep.
And that's something that's in it. And there's a part of me that's starving for like real reporting. I feel like both parties have, really played this propaganda game where it's like, I don't know how much I can believe from, I think CNN is typically a very democratic, liberal favored media, and Fox News is very much the opposite for Republican Party.
I think it's less the political parties though. It's more the networks. It's more the newspapers. Like they need to sell advertising. They need to sell subscriptions, and reporting on the news
But isn't Joe Rogan's podcast an example of like why people get gravitated towards people who don't mind deep diving into topics that aren't talked about on the surface? That's what he does a lot of. Now, obviously, people kind of see him as very heavily favored towards the Republican Party also, but I do think that he is very honest about trying to have an open mind, an open conversation with both sides when he pushes for it. I really do.
He does. He has both. He has people on both sides, but he's not writing an article. He is doing a long form podcast, which you can't really fit into a newspaper, or, and it's also that I think the type of things that you're talking about are complicated, and they often require like more than one person's input to get a full understanding of what's happening. And that makes it hard because the people that you talk to then have their own biases, and you have to, it becomes this fact checking, reporting, deep dive, which would be really interesting, I think. And I would like to read that type of stuff too, but I just don't think.
No, so you're saying that they need to sell
pays.
newspapers. I'm like, I know, but that's the reason why I don't pay for newspapers, because that's not what I'm getting. If you gave me that, I'll pay for it.
Not you though, not you.
Yeah.
But the most people are just not like you and me, really. Like I really am interested in, I want to know like objectively what's happening, and I want to be able to sort of form my own opinions based on my own values, my own beliefs, my own life experiences. I don't want to be told how to feel. I want to just know what's happening, and then I can decide if I'm for or against it based on my own values, essentially.
So here, I know I take moments to wait to jump on the ledge and put myself out there politically, but I will put out an opinion I have politically. There's been cases in history where the way the message is being construed is it always has been construed a certain way that favors biases, but when they become very extreme, and there's examples of this on, we're talking about the, I know people in the Democratic Party like to try to call everyone who is a Republican a fascist, and I know everyone in the Republican Party likes to call every Democrat a socialist and communist, but both of those types of messaging really piss me off, because if you really dive into history and you start to try to broad classify a group, I know they're trying to do the whole like, oh, we're afraid this party is going to really turn into this, right? My reaction to that is, I get you're trying to prevent, in your belief, you might believe that you're trying to prevent that from happening, but as long as your party participates in this, really, unbiased portrayal and classifying this kind of propaganda point of view, you're basically becoming that very thing that you're trying to say the other party is doing, because this very controlled environment of what is being told from the government to their people, where it is distorted and it's in the worst possible way. The examples I can remember where it was done in the worst possible ways were the very deep end fascist regimes and the very deep socialist communist regimes, which one thing I do know about like the right left wing politics from history is whenever when people slide too far to the end of the scale one way or the other, when you get really far to one side, and with that also comes this very controlled propaganda point of view, that always ends very, very badly.
Yeah.
That's what happened in Germany. That's what happened in Japan. That's what happened in Russia. That's what happened in China. That's what's happened in North Korea right now, right? It's like the examples are both ends of the spectrum, and it's not something that you can say one part on one side of the spectrum it's bad, but not on the other. It has been we've only had a world of nations for less than 200 years, right? A world of nations. I mean, the U.S. as a republic, capitalistic type of nation, has close to a 300-year history at this point, 250-year history. But as a world of nations, the end of monarchy systems really began in the turn of the century. And so I've always just taken the point of view that we are still trying to figure things out. And that's why it's hard for me to take positions about which side of that's why I always like to hear both policy positions on things, because at the end of the day, we only have approximately 100 years worth of history. I say a little over 100 years, but for like as a world where we've looked at ourselves as a world of nations and ended monarchy type systems, it's really 100 years. You look at the fall of the czars, they end. I mean, the British government still has their monarchies, but they're really just figureheads, right? The beginning of their parliament with their prime ministers, right? All of those, the story, that movie about China, The Last Emperor, right? The Japanese emperor was the last monarchy they had in Japan, at World War II. We're really talking about the end of traditional monarchy systems is approximately 100 years old as a world, and it's really just 2-3 generations. And to me, it's like, hey, we thought this was a good idea. Let's tweak it, move forward, and make it better. But we're still in that experimental stage where civilizations have existed for tens of thousands of years, right? And in a world of nations like this is still relatively new. So I think that there's room for us to kind of move back and forth. But what we have seen is that when that world of nations was created, there were very extreme versions of it that existed. And in both scenarios, it ended very, very badly. And so I've always that's one of the reasons why I naturally end up being more bipartisan, because I've seen historically what happens when it's really far on one end of the spectrum and the other, and both are really, really bad. Both are really bad.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think the reason I'm bipartisan is because there are some things I agree about with some Democratic principles, and there are some things I agree about with some Republican principles.
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to just jump all the way into one or the other because they don't really coincide with how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you see with these. I think that's what you see sometimes with these election cycles over time, is you see this sway. Like a lot of people, for example, in 2016, you heard a lot of people saying, like basically they were voting against Trump. There wasn't really like a vote for Biden. It was more like, or 2020, sorry, more like a vote against Trump,
Yeah, that
and
was very
then,
much why Michael Bloomberg was running.
and then in this cycle though, in this latest election, it became more of a,
Lesser of
we're
two
going to,
evils.
that's right. It's like we are going in a direction that a lot of people didn't like, with whatever, all these other, I'm not going to say specifically any of the things, but we know what they are. And then there's a pushback where it becomes, look, Trump also now is a much more of a known quantity. You kind of know what you're getting. I think there's a little bit less, not excitement, less like irrational craziness about him a little bit, because you just know what you're getting with him. And I think that was the pick that was made this time. Most people are gravitate toward the center if you ask them, but again, clicks and political campaigns, they live on the fringes. That's where they get their donations from. That's where they get their advertising dollars from. And so that's where they tend to live. But
yeah, but the problem is that, and sometimes their efforts to do so, they end up losing some supporters, which I think is what happened with the Democratic Party.
For sure. Well, you can. That's right. Well, if you pander to the minority in your party, and what I mean is like not the base. Not those that are like center left or center right, which is going to be probably the majority of people in America, right? Most people, if you ask them, what they want? They want to have a steady job. They don't want to pay too much in taxes. They want to feel like they have an opportunity to live their life. That's what most people in America want.
Right.
They want to raise a family, and they want to just they want to have a good life, whatever that really kind of means in their own terms. If you start messing with that, that's when people get grumpy. On the fringes is where you have all this other stuff. Whether it's good or bad, I think is up to whatever. That's your own opinion. But I think most people, they just want to have a good life. They want to have they want to have consistency with how they experience their life. And if you threaten that, then then people make changes. But yeah, politics is crazy, man. I think there's going to be more of a movement towards the center overall anyway. I mean, I think this is kind of taking a little bit of a tangent, but I think another
reason
reason
where the Democratic Party was more bipartisan.
Yeah,
I feel like the Clinton years was very much that.
100%. And Clinton balanced the budget, man. He was the one that came in and he made a bunch of cuts when he came in. He literally was.
He was a Democrat, but he was very bipartisan in his position. A lot. So was Hillary.
He wanted to get things done. A lot of times I think there's just there's money, there's opportunity in divisiveness for people. He
wasn't the best in foreign policy, but he, from what I could tell, he did a lot of good. I mean, I was younger. I was a teenager at the time.
Right. But people don't like him because of his, sexual proclivities.
Yeah, well,
the dude was a good president.
JFK is on a 50-cent coin, and his affair was like front and center with the most famous woman in Hollywood. I mean, I don't think there's even a woman in Hollywood nearly as close as famous as Marilyn Monroe's at that time.
Yeah. What also changed though about this election was Trump and JD Vance, both of them going on those long form podcasts and just getting peppered with questions and having to talk, being challenged and having to respond to those things. And I think the Democrats didn't do that at all. And that also really, really hurt them because it
actually reminds me a lot of like the way that Obama crushed Hillary in the primaries.
For sure.
He approached a different way of delivering a message. People heard him in that platform.
Right. He used Facebook. He did a much more grassroots campaign. It was still more old school, but the platforms that he used, were
he could do an old school platform like town hall type discussion and then share it on social media, and it would pick up traffic like media, right? With the classic style of making campaign ads and running it on TV, it was a dying media platform.
Yep. And it also, where the Democrats messed up.
I bought into it. I voted for Obama. I didn't love Hillary, too. But
I did. But where the Democrats also messed up this time too is they saw what was happening and they tried to go on some long form podcasts, but they were
A little too
scripted.
late.
Well, they made people, they controlled the questions, they controlled the time, they controlled the location, and it makes you wonder, like, why can't they? Made me wonder, I guess, why can't you just sit down and answer some questions? Like, I don't
I think that
understand.
there's some fighting within that party, because I heard a lot of people were kind of grumpy about the way that they just kind of pushed Kamala because they ran out of time for the primaries and all that
For
stuff,
sure.
right? And
But,
if I showed any
but they didn't.
disdain for how that went, I was very much in that party, because I'm like, I
But
I've
that's the
been
thing. Those are questions that people want to have answered. That's why
Mhm.
you go on these long form podcasts. It may not be the best answer in the world. Like, you may have to just say, look, maybe we messed up a little bit or whatever. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but people want to hear that.
Mhm.
Like Trump went on like Theo Vaughn. He went on some crazy podcast.
Theo Vaughn.
Where you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, he just showed up and was like, "Let's
Let's
go."
talk to this comedian with a mullet and see how this
He is the
conversation goes.
funniest. He is on a podcast. Him just randomly saying things. He is one of the funniest people that I've ever seen in my life.
Who,
Like,
Theo Vaughn?
listen to, yeah, like not in person, but just like his podcasts
Yeah.
are hilarious.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just think like all of those things added up. That's where you get some of those things, and to sort of maybe close the loop on this whole DOGE thing. I think that Trump and Elon via the administration, they had a bit of a mandate.
Yeah.
They talked about exactly what they were going to do, and they were kind of overwhelmingly voted in, and that's what that means.
Well,
I think.
yep. As we wrap this up, sorry, because we're running short on time today.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would like any of our readers. So now that it sounds like I can rely on the fact that we actually have some readers, because they tell me that they listen. So, or listeners. So I appreciate you guys listening in. I'm up for a sway. I am not here to make an argument. I'm here to hear an argument, and hey, I'm open to be swayed one way or the other. The anti-Doge movement, the protesting that's out there, if it's a group of government workers that were laid off, it's not that I don't appreciate that point of view. I think that I'd still like to hear from that point of view, but that immediately also makes me realize, like, yes, their biases were pretty clear, right? They had a job, maybe they're independent contractor who did work for the government in that way, right? But if you're not, and so I'd still like to kind of hear like what good things would maybe like coming to an end because of this that you thought were good, on the precipice of like maybe some big changes happening that have been ended because of this. If that's a point of view you have we're in a position, I'd love to hear it. But also, if you're not, but you're still also very anti-Elon and Doge, I want to hear the reasons why, for real. Like, listen, because I'm really confused by the general message. It's been a running joke, as the political party swings back and forth since I was a child, and so I just took that as like, okay, well, I would imagine that if it's wasteful, and our deficit's getting worse and worse, um, you know, I've heard George Carlin chat about it for 30 years ago. He's been dead what 15 years or something, 20 years, for a while, and
Yep.
I've heard comedians joke about over government spending for a long time. I thought in general that getting that down was probably a good thing. I get shrinking the government's like a very Republican thing, but if it is pure waste that we're getting rid of from an entrepreneur, I'm just a little confused as to what the general public who's so passionate about it, what their message is why they don't like it. If it doesn't personally, because what I don't see is how it personally impacts them.
Right. Yep. I'd agree.
That's the part that I'm just confused about. So
I don't know. I'm sure some people would be able to tell you, but I think some people are just going along with the ride.
someone's Social Security check not get cut anymore. Someone's Medicaid be withdrawn since then. Something. I just want to hear someone being personally impacted by it, because I can't see how anyone's having a direct correlation to it other than the actual government employees or civilian contractors who received work from the government who are directly impacted that would be protesting. Not that I don't want to hear their message too, but it's obvious then why they're upset. But what I saw was a pretty large crowd, and my assumption was that a lot of them, especially if they're in Washington, weren't personally impacted by it. So what's the message?
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, cool. We wrapping up real quick.
Yeah.
Who are you? Did you do a bracket?
I didn't do a bracket. You know how I am with this. 4 quadrants, bro. Urgent,
it takes
important.
You 5 minutes. It takes you 5 minutes. We do a family one.
Yeah,
It's kind of my thing,
I know I see them, but I'm really, really careful about how I separate that time in those quadrants. I know.
Boo.
The only quadrant.
Well,
Well, look, you do it with your family. Says, hey, that's more into more important than would seem otherwise. My kids aren't into it.
oh yeah, no, it's definitely like I'm not really like getting into like just a random bracket challenges and stuff like that. I do one with the team because it's fun, like they know like I'm a KU guy, and so
Yeah.
like
If
it's
the
sort of like a
people in my
team building
circle,
thing.
family, friend, direct close friends or family, like ask me to do one for fun with them, and we're gonna make this like a thing with us. But like in my inner circle, like the closest people with me aren't tracking it, so then I don't. Then it falls in quadrant 4, and I just don't give it the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to do it. We usually do like for my family, the winner gets to pick like something that we do.
Hmm.
And the NCAA tournament's so chaotic that like even my 8-year-old literally has a chance to win because
Yeah, you never know how it goes.
you
No
can pick,
question.
because they're not pick. I think last year, 2 years ago was the first year that we did it. Everybody was terrible, all the kids, because they didn't really get it. But once they go through it once, then they're like, oh, I'm gonna win this thing. And so they got
Yeah,
better like last year. I think they're gonna be pretty good this year. But
I'm more
so
committed to learning how to golf.
let's go. Hey, we're going golfing this weekend.
I know.
We're going to St. George, Utah.
Yeah, I
So
still got to put together a plan set for a couple of builds and work with the CDC TAC and get some other stuff built. My time is just. I know it's coming. It's coming.
yep, that's fine. Hey, you don't have to be great. You just have to be good enough to get around.
Yeah, I'm not there yet.
Yep, soon.
Too
Someday.
competitive. Too competitive for me to take it too casual. I got to really commit to it.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. Okay.
Yep.
All right. We'll wrap it up.
Yep.
As always, this is the Business Barbershop Podcast. Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe if you want. Leave a comment. We will probably read them and respond to them. Okay.
Yeah.
But as always, I am Chris.
I'm Keen.
That's it for today. See ya.
See you guys later.